Good afternoon, everyone. It's hard to believe we've come to the final session of the conference. We hope it has been a wonderful experience for all of you. JCPA is the leading organization in the Jewish community working on criminal justice reform. Our engagement on national advocacy in partnership with diverse communities prepared JCPA to support our network during the Black Lives Matter protests last summer. This resurgence of the civil rights movement has prioritized ending mass incarceration and systemic racism in our society. In our session today, we will launch the Jewish Values Framework, a Jewish call to action to end mass incarceration. We will also hear from our Atlanta colleagues from the Jewish and Black communities who are working together on reform. We will conclude with remarks from the newly elected Senator Warnock.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rabbi Rachel Gartner, and I'm the Director for Jewish Life at Georgetown University, and I'm also a board member of TRUA, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights. I'm also involved with JCPA's National Jewish Network on Criminal Justice Reform. Through this experience, I've come together with other Jewish leaders from around the country who are working on an array of criminal justice reforms with the aim of collectively increasing Jewish voice on both the need for reform and the types of reforms that will create a better world. Today, we're launching a Jewish call to action to end mass incarceration, a year-long project that will allow us to take a deep dive into understanding the plethora of issues that make up the criminal legal system. We'll look at these issues through a Jewish lens, and then we'll engage on making change based on our Jewish values and teachings of restorative justice. Our focus is not just on incarceration, but the drivers that affect how we use incarceration. And we will partner with other advocates who've been working on this work and will continue to do so around the country. Today, we're launching our Jewish Values Framework, written by the network and signed by almost 100 Jewish leaders, including many Jewish legislators. To share the framework with you, we've put together a video. We hope you find it impactful.
We as American Jews.
We as American Jews.
We as American Jews.
Believe in a United States
that lives up to its ideals of justice,
equity, and dignity for all. The suffering of millions at the hands of our unjust criminal legal system is one of the most pressing civil rights crises of our time.
The United States has become the leading incarcerator in the world, and our criminal justice system disproportionately targets and impacts people of color.
Our Jewish commitments to empathy, mercy, and restorative justice demand that we join in solidarity with our most impacted neighbors.
We must build upon our legacy by ending today's injustices, including racial injustice, not just in principle, but in action.
We must reorient our society toward a preventive, rehabilitative, and restorative justice approach.
Reimagining public safety is essential to creating a just society.
We must stop criminalizing race, poverty,
mental illness, and substance abuse.
Our advocacy is based on Jewish values.
Teshuvah, return, repentance, and restorative justice.
B'Tselem Elohim.
Everyone is made in the divine image.
When we destroy one person, we destroy an entire universe.
Tzedek Tirdof.
Justice you shall pursue.
Chesed, balancing justice with kindness.
Love your neighbor as yourself.
Our society must be built on fairness, justice, love, and respect, not just for ourselves, but for all people. All aspects of our society and criminal justice system should be based on human dignity.
Silence in the face of injustice is an active choice.
We cannot be silent, as these values we hold dear are threatened by the inhumanity of mass incarceration and criminalization.
Now is the time to act.
Now is the time to act.
Now is the time to act.
Greetings. My name is Jonathan Rabbi. Along with my wife, I founded a nonprofit to help forge a community of freedom fighters dedicated to resisting injustice. I'm a member of the JCRC of Atlanta and author of Gideon's Promise, a public defender movement to transform criminal justice. It tells the story of our work and the heroic advocates who place themselves in the belly of the criminal justice beast every day. I'm honored to join the Jewish call to action, ending mass incarceration and criminalization. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm a native son of the Squirrel Hill community. I was bar mitzvahed at the Tree of Life, where 11 worshipers were killed because their faith cast them as the other. This is where I learned the Jewish values that led me to a life fighting for justice. These values called me to become a public defender. I learned ours is a history of oppression, and that we're therefore commanded to stand with those who are oppressed. That we've always been the other, and so we must join the fight to resist otherizing any people. I learned the Jewish values at the heart of this critical call to action. In the very first paragraph of Gideon's Promise, I recall learning the concept of tikkun olam, the duty to help repair the world, and how it's continued to guide me and my sister in lives of service. The book then tells the story of this selfless community of advocates. They are Black, Latinx, Native, Asian, and white. They worship differently. Some are guided by their faith and others are non-believers. But it is quintessentially a Jewish story. Every day they stand with the most marginalized among us. They resist our criminal legal system, engaging in a daily fight that often seems hopeless. They're buoyed by one another and the knowledge that their cause is righteous. Every day they live the values of our call to action. Little by little, they force the system to acknowledge these values, making an unjust system a little more humane with each battle. It's tempting to think we can solve this criminal justice crisis by electing less punitive administrators of the system or enacting policies that are less cruel. These are certainly important steps. But real victory requires that we work every day to transform the values of a system that has lost its way. This is the thesis of Gideon's Promise. There is no substitute for a collective of individuals tirelessly toiling to demand justice. As Jews, we know this. Our history teaches this. When we were enslaved in Egypt, we surely would have welcomed a less cruel Pharaoh. We would have embraced policies that shortened the hours we were forced to toil in the sweltering Egyptian sun. But that would not lead to our liberation. Freedom was the fruit of countless men and women working to help the Jews flee Egypt and survive the trek through the desert. Countless Jews and allies, whose names we will never know, resisted during the times of inquisitions, pogroms, and concentration camps. It was this spirit that led so many Jews to fight alongside courageous Black Americans who would lead America's civil rights movement. Today, thousands of public defenders who stand in alliance with impacted communities play this role. They are called to stand against oppression. Their work reflects the best of the values we hold dear as Jews. They remind us that each of us, as individuals, must play a role if these values are to be realized. So collectively, we must support our sisters and brothers who are oppressed as they demand more compassionate criminal justice administrators. We must join them to advocate for less punitive policing, prosecuting, and punishment. But we must never forget that our Jewish values, those values that fuel injustice, are only infused into the system through the work of countless individuals who literally stand alongside those most oppressed, dedicating their lives to this struggle. We may never know their names. They won't seek accolades. They may never be mentioned when we discuss solutions, but they are critical to the fight for justice. Our hope lies in the efforts of individuals who wake up every day to do the work that most reflects the best of our Jewish tradition. This Jewish call to action is a call to each of us.
Good afternoon. I'm Leslie Anderson, Executive Director of the JCRC of Atlanta and co-chair of the Georgia Strategy Team for the National Multi-Faith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration, or GSTMITEMI for short. In all seriousness, I will be referring to the Multi-Faith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration, of which JCPA and JCRC of Atlanta are proud partners, as the Multi-Faith Initiative to distinguish it from the many different groups working on ending mass incarceration in Georgia and this country. It's a good problem to have that EMI is becoming a generalized term for the essential work of reimagining and changing the criminal legal system in our country that impacts our citizens from preschool to death. And it is my pleasure and honor to introduce to you two of the architects of the Multi-Faith Initiative and our next two speakers today. The third founder will be joining us later. Rabbi Lydia Medwin is the Director of Congregational Engagement and Outreach at the Temple in Atlanta, Georgia, and is one of the leaders of the Rothschild Social Justice Institute. Lydia is the co-author with Dr. Ron Wolfson and Rabbi Nicole Auerbach of the Relational Judaism Handbook, How to Create a Relational Engagement Campaign to Build and Deepen Relationships in Your Community. Reverend John Vaughn serves as the executive pastor at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, the spiritual home of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and the pulpit of Senator Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock as the senior pastor. Prior to coming to Georgia in 2020, Reverend Vaughn served for 10 years as the executive vice president at Auburn Theological Seminary, a national leadership development and research institute that equips leaders of faith and moral courage for multi-faith movements for justice. I have had the pleasure of working with both of these learned and passionate clergy and consummate community organizers over the past 3 years as part of the Multi-Faith Initiative, and have watched this interfaith allyship unfold from the first shared expungement program to a national conference in 2019 where JCPA became a sponsor and partner to today's growing network of national and local partnerships. Large portions of JCPA's Criminal Justice Reform Toolkit was included in the Multi-Faith Initiative's conference toolkit, and JCPA continues to add its excellent resources of its staff, from technical operations to national legislative advocacy. In many ways, the conference was really just the beginning of realizing a larger vision that leverages the spiritual, people, and resource power of the U.S. faith community to end mass incarceration in the U.S. Our vision is for multi-faith communities to exercise and amplify their calls and actions for eliminating mass incarceration in a dedicated, savvy, and impactful manner. In the past 2 years, the Multi-Faith Initiative has launched a Preach, Teach, Act initiative to encourage congressional engagement, started the Unlocked Voices concert series with Calling All Crows to bring the music and faith communities together and amplify the stories of formerly incarcerated folks across the nation, and launched pilot project in 6 regions based in major cities: New York City metropolitan area, Atlanta, Little Rock, Arkansas, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Dallas, Texas, and Los Angeles, California. In my current role as the co-chair of the Georgia Strategy Team with Kate Boscia of the National Incarceration Association, I am able to utilize my Jewish communal work and other interfaith and criminal justice reform coalitions to bring more voices and resources to this table, and to bring more awareness to the Atlanta and Georgia Jewish communities about this critical human rights issue. Given that so much of criminal justice takes place on the local and state level, it is imperative that as faith leaders, we look to our own communities to see what is already going on and what work needs to be done and how we can impact it together through direct service, advocacy, philanthropy, and narrative change. There is not a social justice issue out there that doesn't intersect with the criminal legal system in some way. The Multi-Faith Initiative helps us to harness the collective power of our interfaith connections and shared values, among others, that everyone is made in the divine image, justice, and repentance, to engage in the social transformation that is needed now to bend the arc of the moral universe towards justice, a restorative justice that treats all people with humanity and dignity. Please welcome Rabbi Lydia Medwin and Reverend John Vaughn.
Thank you very much, Leslie, for that introduction, and it has indeed been a pleasure to work closely with you over these last couple of years and to be able to present today with my colleague and my friend, Rabbi Lydia Medwin. So the Multi-Faith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration really started in a conversation that started between Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock and my boss at Auburn Seminary. And they had begun, he'd started to float this idea of a conference in a way to try to sharpen the faith community's voice around ending mass incarceration. And so my boss came back to me and asked me if I would be the point person to work with Pastor Warnock on this initiative. And then very quickly, Pastor Warnock then reached out to his good friend and colleague, Rabbi Peter Berg at the temple. And so out of that hatched was a planning conversation where we began to pull together a cross-section of folks, primarily folks who were working on ending mass incarceration, faith communities, as well as those who are directly impacted. And the thing that we discovered early on was that the conference was a good idea, but if this was really gonna make a difference, it needed to be more than a conference. And so we began planning the conference, which actually happened in June of 2019, to really be the launching pad for the Multi-Faith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration. I'll say that in planning this conference and in beginning to seed this national effort, a couple things were important for us. One is we needed to continue to center the voices and the experiences of those that were directly impacted by mass incarceration. And two, we are a faith-based initiative, and that there are things that are happening within faith communities throughout this country around this work. But it was important to us to look at how we could add value to what is already going on within local communities. How we are not creating a brand new thing to put on top of what already exists, but how do we support, add value, and add strength and cohesion to what is happening already within local communities. And so coming out of the conference, the Multi-Faith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration had three priorities. One was to increase the engagement of faith communities around ending mass incarceration. So if you were engaged, how do you up your game? If you weren't engaged, how do you get in the game? So engaged in some way around ending mass incarceration. The second was we wanted to be about shifting the narrative around how we talk about mass incarceration in this country, and particularly the theology. Second chance, this is our sweet spot as faith communities. Redemption, forgiveness, new life, that's where we live as people of faith. But somehow it isn't always captured in our public narratives, even in our public actions around this. And so we want to change the narrative in terms of how we talk about mass incarceration and how we sharpen the faith voice around mass incarceration. And the third is the importance of continuing to engage faith communities in policy change. Because quite honestly, policy at the federal level, at the state, and even in very local regional levels is where a lot of the action is around the decisions that are getting made and that shape what happens to people who are formerly incarcerated. When you hear stories of people who stay connected to this system for years, even after being out, and a lot of that is policy driven. We'll talk, my colleague, Rabbi Lydia, will talk a little bit about the kind of what that work begins to look like regionally, but let me say just a quick word about some of the partnerships that have emerged for us. Leslie mentioned our partnership with Calling All Crows. These are folks in the music industry that are based in Boston that really grew serendipitously out of a couple who saw Pastor Warnock preach one summer, and the husband is the lead singer of a band called Dispatch based out of Boston. And so they were so taken by this issue and started to wrestle, engaged us in a conversation, and out of that grew this partnership with Calling All Crows, their nonprofit. And so with partners in the music industry, we've been looking at ways to, we were originally going to look at ways of how to give concert goers specific things that they could do around ending mass incarceration. And then COVID hit. And so we repurposed it as a way to help raise dollars through virtual concerts for groups doing this work on the ground. And so that's been an exciting partnership this last year. And now we are pivoting to begin a national narrative change project with Calling All Crows. The other interesting partner that has come on the scene for us has been the Players Coalition. These are NFL players, current and former NFL players who are engaged on advocacy. And so they too are now coming to this table around national narrative change. So we're beginning to kind of network the networks and beginning to find ways to build a sense of power and cohesion, and coming to this for us as faith leaders, as faith communities, as folks who believe that our faith is a powerful tool for change in terms of the work that we do. So, Rabbi Lydia, I'm going to pass to you.
Thank you, Reverend Vaughn. It has been one of the highlights of the past few years to get to know you and befriend you. I just want to also offer my thanks to the JCPA for all of their incredible support of our work. Leslie Anderson has been just a supporter with unending fire in her belly for this work. Of course, Rabbi Berg and my colleagues here at the temple, and Reverend Warnock, who is a friend of the temples and also a friend now of all Georgians, and so leads us so well in this work of EMI, no matter where he is. And all of the work that Reverend Vaughn spoke about, we hope is felt in lots of different ways. I mean, our goal is to ultimately lower the number of people who are incarcerated or who are touched by this system, this addiction that our country has for incarcerating people, and replace it with a system that emphasizes compassion and care and restorative justice. We really hope this happens with 3 different strategies that we've been working on, as Reverend Vaughn mentioned. I'll give a little bit of a story for each one. So the first is congregational engagement. We might think as faith communities that outside of advocacy, there may not be a whole lot we can do, but we've discovered that that's just not true. There are so many things that individual congregations can do to either get started on this work or to partner with other communities and take the next step in getting involved. We have, as was mentioned, a Preach, Teach, Act campaign. We'd love for any of you to join by visiting the website www.endingmassincarceration.com. And there you'll see resources for rabbis and other colleagues that may want to be preaching on this topic. There are documentaries as a part of our third partner in this work, Odyssey Impact, who creates incredible documentaries around this issue and many others with toolkits and discussion guides. And there's also ideas for how to really take step forward as congregations to act on behalf of people who are impacted, including hosting record restriction summits, which is a way for lots of people to get their records that might be holding them back from other kinds of life opportunities, life-giving opportunities, to restrict those records in a one-stop shop for free. Bailout days where we can be collecting money. We'll be doing that in partnership with Ebenezer this summer in time for Father's Day, so that fathers can get home to be with their families in time for Father's Day. We heard recently that somewhere around 60 to 70% of those sitting in our city jails, county jails, are there just because they're too poor to leave. That's a travesty. That is a tragedy, and we need to fix that. And we can help as congregations. There are ways that we can hold our elected officials like judges and prosecutors accountable to higher standards. We can host learning opportunities, centering the voices of those who've been impacted. Theses are all ideas that come out of our congregational engagement strategy. With regards to narrative change, we know that so much theology of the past actually helps to reinforce the current realities that we see. And so it's time to redeem also our narratives in addition to the soul of America, as we think about the ways in which we can change the theology, change the narrative of what it has meant to be incarcerated. We've done that through a series called Pipeline to Possibilities, where we've listened to impacted people tell their stories and then listened to incredible change makers and all of these various intersections of life offer ideas for how to make these systems better. And then, of course, we have policy education and policy transformation. So much of this work is on the local level and statewide level. And we know that there are incredible partners out there already doing the work. And so as EMI, we want to help network people with one another to connect to those opportunities that as Jews and as congregations, we can get behind and come alongside to support. And as well, we've been thinking about the kinds of national legislation that we'd like to invite our Jewish community and many other communities to come out to support, whether that's making sure that some of that new money that's getting budgeted for restructuring some of the structures of America goes to education and goes toward breaking the school to prison pipeline. And so if you're interested in any of this work as a congregation, please feel free to reach out to us. We would love to connect you to your local resources. If you're in one of the 6 locations that Leslie mentioned, boy, we'd love to have you as a part of that conversation as well. Please don't be afraid to make a new friend, to start a conversation. Lives literally depend on the work that we do in this generation. And we're so grateful to get to do this together as a Jewish community and as an interfaith community where we get to really live the prophetic dream and see it into reality.
So I guess the final comment I'll make is that I think this is multi-faith work in action in terms of who is together and what we're doing. And Pastor Warnock may talk a little bit about this in his conversation, but we think that the multi-faith approach really is the one that can be the secret sauce to make the difference. The moral grounding, the prophetic voice to really make the difference. I'll close with this before getting on to this conversation with you today. We were talking to some of our colleagues in New York, and we saw this wonderful landscape analysis that's being put together by our colleagues in New York. And you saw the number of congregations that are starting to do something related to end mass incarceration. And at the same time, our lead person in New York said he was in a meeting and somebody said, I don't see the congregations doing much work. And so, that tells us something in terms of the importance of amplifying our voice, being strategic, finding ways to come together, and to really build a sense of power to make change. And that is really the opportunity that the Multi-Faith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration provides. And so we're excited to be with you. We're excited about our partnership with JCPA and all the JCRCs. And thank you so much for letting us share with you today.
Enjoy your afternoon.
Hi, I'm Lois Frank, former chair of JCPA, and I want to set the scene for you. There's a historic neighborhood in downtown Atlanta called Sweet Auburn. It's Auburn Avenue, which at one time was the hub of the Black business community. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference headquarters are on the street. The oldest Black-owned newspaper, the Atlanta Daily World, is housed there. Martin Luther King's birth home is there. The best jazz club in Atlanta and maybe in the country, the Royal Peacock, right across the street from SNCC headquarters, was also on Auburn Avenue. But most iconic of all, sitting on Auburn Avenue is Ebenezer Baptist Church. This is sacred ground. It's sacred because the most moral voices in the country came from the pulpits of Ebenezer. When Daddy King preached there, when Martin Luther King preached there, and now when Reverend Warnock preaches there. The Jewish community has deep connections with Ebenezer. Hundreds of conservative rabbis gathered Ebenezer with boxes of matzah to send to the Soviet embassy in Washington during the Soviet Jewry movement. The Jewish community joined interfaith colleagues there to collaborate and to celebrate the peace signing between Israel and Jordan. 2 summers ago, our JCRC hosted 60 Israeli and Palestinian teenagers from Kids for Peace there when they visited after experiencing several weeks of summer camp together. When we learned that Reverend Warnock was throwing his hat into the ring for the Senate seat from Georgia, we knew this was an opportunity for the kind of leadership, government, and politics that could bring Georgia and America to the moral heights we seek. Reverend Warnock's campaign messages were a reflection of the man himself. They dealt with what he wanted to achieve if elected: affordable health care, good policing, voting rights, a voice for the underrepresented. And to the Jewish community, he made a strong commitment about Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. His ads were not confrontational, they were positive. They were based on what he hoped to achieve, and he made light of the fear-mongering ads run against him. He did it with humor and humanity. This is the man that he is. We at JCPA had a long-standing relationship, a love relationship with Congressman John Lewis. He's addressed this conference on 2 occasions, and he won our highest honor with the Tikkun Olam Award. Representative Lewis was a congregant at Ebenezer, and Reverend Warnock was his pastor and his friend. I hope today will begin a long legacy of the same kind of profound relationship between Senator Warnock that we had with Congressman Lewis. We've asked Corey Shapiro, JCPA's Policy Advisory Committee Chair, to begin that relationship today in dialogue with Senator Warnock. The senator has been in office for less than 4 months, but he's already proving himself to be the moral voice and the strong friend we want in Congress. It's my honor to present Senator Reverend Warnock to you at JCPA.
Well, thank you so very much, Lois. It's great to see you. What a wonderful glimpse of nature in the background. It's wonderful to be here with the Jewish Council of Public Affairs, and I look forward to my conversation in just a few moments with my brother Corey Shapiro. And so I'm going to try to defy Baptist gravity and be brief. Let me put my timer here in front of me. They asked me to talk for about 8 minutes, and then Corey and I will have some conversation. But thank all of you for being here. And gosh, do we all not remember and miss and continue to love the great John Lewis, who was my parishioner. I was his pastor, but he was the mentor, and his spirit lives on with us. It certainly was appropriate that he would receive the Tikkun Olam Award, the sense in which his whole ministry, his work was about repairing the world. I'm grateful to my colleagues who were in the previous section of the program, Rabbi Lydia Medwin of the Temple, who is my sister in so many ways, and who really should have an office at Ebenezer Church. She's there so much doing the work that we do together. And the Reverend John Vaughn, who is our executive pastor, and I'm so very blessed and fortunate to have him there. And folks wonder how in the world is the pastor, the senator, and the senator still a pastor? A big part of that answer is the Reverend John Vaughn, our executive pastor, who is well able, and we work together in partnership with other parts of our ministry at Ebenezer Church. But thank you all so much. It's so important for us to come together in this way. And as you continue the work that you are doing, advocating in the state of Georgia and advocating on Capitol Hill, you are helping us to make change on all the issues that are important to us as people of faith, as people of moral courage. And I'm grateful for the work of the JCPA. And I'm so excited about the conversation that's been going on in the midst of this conference. Glad to see your sessions tackling such issues as racism and anti-Semitism, poverty and equity, voting rights, and criminal justice. These are issues that I've worked on my entire career. I've been focused on it in my pastoral work as an activist. And it is that work really that has led me to the United States Senate. Let me say how proud I am of the state of Georgia. I know Georgia is in the news right now, and there's a lot of discussion about the voter suppression bill, and that's exactly what it is that passed a few weeks ago. And we certainly need to talk about that, and I've got ideas about how we address that. But, you know, as a proud Georgia boy, I don't want us to get so caught up in that conversation that the other folks on this call and in this conference from around the country forget that after all, Georgia saved the country just a couple months ago. Don't forget that. It was Georgia that pushed against the ugly side of our history, and in one fell swoop, elected the first Jewish senator and the first African-American senator from the state of Georgia to the United States Senate. And when Georgia did that, we gave the majority to the Democrats with Chuck Schumer as our leader. And because we were able to do that, we've been able to push forward the most progressive parts of the president's agenda. We were able to pass in short order, while nominating or confirming nominations to the cabinet. We were able to pass in short order the American Rescue Plan, a $1.9 trillion historic piece of legislation that literally puts shots in people's arms as we push against this pandemic, provides much needed economic relief to American families as they are wrestling in the midst of an economic turn down, the likes of which we have not seen in a couple of generations as a result of the pandemic. We would not have been able to pass the American Rescue Plan, which we did through reconciliation. We would be having a very different conversation had Georgia not shown up in the way that it did and sent John Ossoff, my brother from another mother, and Raphael Warnock to the United States Senate so that we could push forward this agenda. And now we pivot to the American Jobs Plan, which is infrastructure, clean energy jobs, sustainable roads, housing, broadband, repairing our bridges and our virtual bridges. You know, I often say that our broken infrastructure in our country, and we are long overdue. We've been talking about infrastructure for a couple of generations. We haven't done it yet. As long as I've been paying attention to politics, we've been threatening to do a robust infrastructure plan. It's past time for us to finally do it. I often say that our broken infrastructure in this country is a reflection of the brokenness in our politics. Because when you talk about roads and bridges and airports and ports, When you talk about green space and your public parks, you're talking about, if you will, the family room. You're talking about our shared space, the space that we share together as an American people, as an American family. And you know, all families have some level of dysfunction. Yours too, let's be honest. All of our families have some dysfunction. But sometimes families get caught up in a rut and folks are having a fight or an argument or a disagreement, however you want to describe it. And sometimes it's been going on so long, people don't even remember what it's about. People just kind of mad, you know. Forgive me, not good preacher or senator talk, you know, just kind of in a funk and you're not even sure what it's about anymore. And, you know, sometimes when you can't come to terms on all the issues, sometimes the best thing you can do is to get busy working on something together. You know, go to the Home Depot. I mentioned that. That's a great Georgia company. And, you know, buy some supplies, upgrade the kitchen, paint the garage, paint the fence, you know, add some outside lighting. In other words, get involved in the work of home improvement. And while you're engaged in a home improvement project, maybe you can have some conversation about the other issues that are kind of gnawing at you. And right now we got some folk who are busy trying to stir up the stuff that gnaws at us. They're trying to accentuate our differences. They're sowing the seeds of division in the American family. And we're seeing the emergence in dangerous ways, right, of a kind of robust and unembarrassed anti-Semitism and racism and bigotry. And then there are things that we've just been trying to figure out for a long time. I'm saying that America needs a big home improvement project. We need to get involved in some work together, put our people back to work, create some jobs that pay a livable wage, spur the economy coming out of this pandemic, and position the American economy to lead well into the 21st century. And so that's work that I'll be focused on in the days ahead, and know that as I do it as a United States Senator representing the great state of Georgia, I will do it led always by my values of justice, truth-telling, love. We don't talk about love in politics, but you know, love is the most powerful force in the world. And justice is what love looks like in public. I will be led by my values. And it is these values that have caused me to stand up time and time again, first as a citizen, as a pastor, against the things that would divide us and then destroy us. But now that I'm in the Senate, one of my early actions was to join the Senate bipartisan task force for combating anti-Semitism. And we recently sent a bipartisan letter urging President Biden to nominate a qualified ambassador to monitor and combat rising anti-Semitism worldwide. And I'll be doing everything I can to make sure that this gets done. We have to stand up for one another. Martin Niemöller, the great pastor during Hitler's Third Reich, said first they came for the socialists and I didn't speak because I was not a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists and I didn't speak because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews and I didn't speak because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me and there was no one left to speak. And so that's why we've got to stand up for one another. It's the reason why I was proud to be one of the co-sponsors of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, standing up against anti-Asian bigotry and hate crimes that took the lives of several innocent folks just a few weeks ago in our great state of Georgia. And then we've got to continue to stand up as my friends, Rabbi Medwin and Reverend Vaughn were talking about right before I came on. We got to continue to stand up in America for the need to address the issue of criminal justice reform. We've got to pass the George Floyd Act. But I've been saying for years that police brutality is driven by a more basic problem in America, and that is mass incarceration. Since about 1980 or so, our country has invested way too much in the logic of incarceration. And as a result of that, when we could have been investing in people, we were investing in controlling people. And as a result of that, we have by far the largest carceral complex in the world. We got more people in prison than anybody in the world. We got a greater percentage of our people in prison than anybody in the world. The land of the free is the incarceration capital of the world. I don't have to preach that sermon to this group. I'm preaching to the choir. But know that that is the work that I've been doing for years. It is the reason why I conceived the Ending Mass Incarceration work. And we launched it along with our friends at the Temple a couple of years ago. Proud of that work. It continues to drive what I do in the Senate. And then in closing, and nobody believes the preacher when he says in closing, we've got to work on voting rights to make sure that we secure the franchise. Yes, they're trying to make it harder in the state of Georgia to vote. And it is the reason why I am a lead co-sponsor of the For the People Act. And I'll be pushing also for the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We can talk more about that in the Q&A period, but it is important work. We've got to push back against those who are engaged in a project of what I call democracy in reverse, a situation in which rather than the citizens picking their politicians, the politicians are trying to cherry pick their voters. It cannot stand. We who believe in America, we who believe in democracy, we who believe in the covenant we have with one another as an American people, e pluribus unum, out of many one. There's no more sacred and urgent work that we must do in this moment than expanding access to the ballot and securing the right to vote. And so that's why I'm grateful that there's a JCPA. I'm inspired by the work that you've been doing for so very long, for decades, and I look forward to working with you in the seasons ahead.
Thank you so much, Senator Warnock, and you inspire us, you inspire me, and your leadership on all these issues throughout the years has been so important and so vital for the work that we all are doing. And so thank you so much, and thank you for joining us today and speaking to the folks here at our conference. My first question for you is, as a faith leader, what made you decide to seek public office? And how do you see your faith and your public advocacy working together to achieve your vision for being a senator during this particular moment in history?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question, Corey. Listen, everything that I have tried to do in my public life has been driven by my faith. And it may seem like a rather unusual, and it is an unusual step for a pastor to take, to decide to run for office and then high public office. But for me, my campaign for the Senate, in which I got a chance to raise the issues that I've been working on for years, and then my election to the United States Senate, is a continuation of my lifelong commitment to service. I've been talking about voting rights, not just talking about it. We register voters at Ebenezer. And by the way, those who are here and part of various faith communities know that is work that you can do in your church or your temple. That is nonpartisan work. We register voters after worship, after our weekend services, because for me, a vote is a kind of prayer for the kind of world that we desire for us and our children. And so I've been registering voters. I served for a while as chair of the New Georgia Project, where we registered hundreds of thousands of new voters. And when Georgia went too far with the issue of voter suppression, my church actually voted, my board agreed, and we decided to become a plaintiff, and we sued the state of Georgia for its voter suppression tactics. My church has been bailing poor people out of jail for years who were there, not because they were dangerous, but because they couldn't afford bail, as a way of talking about bail reform and the need for bail reform. We have been engaged. We had We hosted the first expungement event in the state of Georgia, and then later partnered again with our friends at the Temple, because there's nothing like great work in the kind of Black Jewish coalition that we've had over the years. We had a great Veterans Day expungement event at the Temple a few years ago, and we've done a few since then. We have worked on addressing the issue of human trafficking, labor trafficking, and sex trafficking. Again, with the Temple. We have been involved, of course, with the work of mass incarceration. So all of this work has been a part of my ministry. And often it has placed me in confrontation with the pharaohs of this world. And when I say the pharaohs of this world, I'm not talking so much about a person as much as I'm talking about a system. I don't mean to demonize anybody, but I'm talking about the system of Pharaoh. It has put me in confrontation with what we call in the Christian tradition powers and principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. And in fact, the last time I came to the Capitol before getting elected, I came with a group of clergy, and the Congress was busy passing then, at that time in 2017, another roughly $2 trillion bill. But that bill was very different from the one that I just helped pass. That bill was largely a tax cut to the riches of the riches of the rich in the country. It gave far more to folks who were in the top 1% and 5% than the whole rest of the country. And so when they were passing that bill, I came to this Capitol where I sit today, and I began to say that a budget is not just a fiscal document, it's a moral document. Show me a nation's budget and I'll show you its values, who you think matters and who doesn't, who is necessary and who's indispensable and who's dispensable and disposable. And we began to pray and sing, an ecumenical group of us, in the rotunda of the Capitol. And the Capitol Police showed up and they said, you can't gather here and pray and sing. We'll give you 3 warnings. And after the 3rd warning, we'll have to arrest you. Well, the only issue with that declaration is that I had already been arrested. I'd been arrested before, but I mean in a deeper sense. My mind and my imagination had been arrested by this idea that we as a nation are better than this. We're better than taking resources from those who need it the most in order to give a tax cut to those who need it the least. And so we began to kneel and we stayed there, and the Capitol Police, they were very professional. I cast no aspersions. These are the folks who are keeping me safe right now as I sit in this office. They were very professional, but they did their job, and I was doing mine in the great spirit of civil disobedience, embraced by Abraham Joshua Heschel as he marched alongside Dr. King in Selma. And they took us to central booking in 2017. Well, I decided to run for the United States Senate in 2020 to give those Capitol Police officers an opportunity to escort me one more time. And so every day now when I drive up to the Capitol, the officers who were doing their job that day and escorted me to central booking, every now and then escort me around the Capitol to make sure I get to my next appointment. And so for me, it's about moving from being a movement from protest to public policy, translating my work of activism and agitation into legislation. It is, for me, the work of the Lord.
Thank you. Well, we're all glad that you did decide to run in 2020 and that we now have your voice in the Senate. And you're talking about African-American Jewish relationships and that coalition that's been formed. As a multiracial Jewish community, we dedicated this conference to set strategies for achieving racial justice in America. And last night, we watched a movie and heard Ambassador Andrew Young and Sherry Frank, and you were in the movie as well, speak from Atlanta about revitalizing the African-American Jewish Alliance. And you hail from Atlanta, where it was the center of the civil rights movement. And so what recommendations and best practices would you like to share with our audience on how we can keep building those relationships?
You know, there's something about a history and experience immersed in suffering and immersed in oppression that gives one a certain kind of perspective on the world. And Black people in this country and around the world for that matter, and our Jewish sisters and brothers, have a kind of sacred history that is immersed in, baptized, if you will, in suffering. And out of that has come a kind of freedom faith that sees human flourishing and human freedom as a divine undertaking, and a recognition that when we are engaged in that work, we're not doing simply a political thing, that we are partners with God, who, when he shows up in Exodus chapter 3, God identifies God in this way: I am the Lord your God. I have seen your affliction. I've seen the taskmasters. I have heard your cry. I have come down to deliver you out of the hands of the Egyptians into the good and spacious land. It is the work of salvation. I remind my Christian sisters and brothers who sometimes too often talk about salvation in terms that are much too narrow and individualistic, that the basic notion of salvation in Scripture really is literally the broadening of communal space. Another way of thinking about it is creating a world that's big enough for all of us to breathe. We can all breathe. Tragically, that's what George Floyd died saying: I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And so poor people in many ways have a knee on their neck, somebody squeezing the life out of them, in his case, literally. But it's the reason why we fight, and we've had to stand up time and time again, right, against anti-Semitism, against racism, and for voting rights, and for livable wages, and for a nation that invests less in a carceral state and more in preschool, because we have these histories that give us what the liberation theologians call the hermeneutical privilege of the poor, or the epistemological privilege of the oppressed, that oppressed people see things in a certain kind of way because of their history, and they see it gives them a kind of wisdom and insight that then calls all of us together to build what Dr. King called the beloved community. And so all I would say to all of us today is let's continue to lean into that story. It's a story that's so inspiring that slaves in the American context took it up, and the song of Moses and Miriam became our song. And we sang about it in a way that you couldn't tell where Moses and Miriam's story ended and where ours began. And we, in our case, connected it to Jesus, whom we see as liberator and Lord. And we sang, go down, Moses, tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. And then we asked when we got close to Easter, were you there when they crucified my Lord? It causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there? Because it was our lived experience. And so what we've got to do is lean into that shared story. Number one. Number two, we've got to continue to build relationships. Rabbi Peter Berg is my friend and my brother. And we're able to do great work together because we talk to each other before the crisis shows up. So when the crisis shows up, I literally can call him and say, can you come to my church in 20 minutes? something, the president of the United States has said something that is just terribly outrageous on the eve of Dr. King's birthday, and we must address it. And he showed up, and we stood there in the sanctuary and we spoke to the issue. Or when he's called me, or when I've heard about an attack on a temple or a synagogue, I reach out to him. It's a relationship that we already have, so that when the 911 emergency happens and an attack on one of us, the relationships are already deep, authentic, and real. Let's keep building on that. I could say much more, but I'll stop there.
I could listen to you for hours, Senator. So I don't want to stop you, but I do have another question that we want to ask you, and that I'm curious, because it's an issue that I care a lot about. Earlier today, I moderated a panel on voting rights, and one of our panelists was from Atlanta, from Fair Fight. And this issue is incredibly important to JCPA, and I said me personally, and we have worked on voting rights for decades. As you mentioned, Georgia has been at the center of voting rights battles in the courts, in the legislature, and in voter mobilization. So I'm curious, even in just a few months that you've been in the Senate, what are some of the ways that you think the Jewish community can support those efforts, particularly with HR 1 and HR 4, at the federal and also at the local level in fighting voter suppression efforts around the country?
Please hear me, my sisters and brothers, everybody listening to this and connected to this conference. There's no more important moral work than we can be doing right in this moment than defending the right to vote. Voting rights are preservative of all other rights. So I'm not saying that voting rights is more important than issue. I'm saying that in a democracy, all the things that we're fighting for presuppose the reality of the people being able to speak in their democracy, and therefore direct the direction of their country and their destiny within it. So whether we're talking about mass incarceration, or an infrastructure bill, or COVID relief, if there's a widening gap between what the people actually want and what they can get, then everything else that's at stake for us is in peril. So we have to fight. We have to insist on the right to vote. So the last time the 1965 voting rights law that John Lewis, as he used to say in his own humble way, he gave a little blood for on that bridge. Truth is, he almost died. Viola Luiso did die fighting for voting rights. Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, 2 Jews and an African American, did die. Medgar Evers did die. The last time that law was reauthorized was in 2006. George W. Bush, a Republican, was president. It passed the Senate that I'm now a member of 96-0. Now, voting rights ought to be bipartisan. But something has shifted in the last few years. Supreme Court asked the Congress to update Section 4 of the Voting Rights Bill. That's what the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is. There are 16 members of the Senate right now who were either in the Senate or they may have been House members. But hear me, there are 16 members of the Senate right now Republicans, who voted to authorize the voting rights law in 2006. So part of what you can ask them is what changed? You voted for it in 2006. John Lewis is an effort to update the law so that states like Georgia, if you act right, you can get out of it. You don't have to continue to deal with pre-clearance. Just show a record of openness to everybody's right to the franchise. So we got to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act because that protects the franchise. But we also have to pass, be really clear, we also have to pass the For the People Act because that expands our access to the ballot. And if we don't pass For the People, a lot of the things that were done in the Georgia bill and some 47 other states will not be corrected. We don't correct some of these horrible bills that we've been talking about the last few weeks. They don't get corrected simply by passing John Lewis. And I won't get into all the technicalities, it'll take way too long. Just know that the only way you fix some of those things is you got to pass for the people, and you got to pass John Lewis. So in the ways that you can gather your organization, your congregations, the places where you have influence, the people you can call on both sides of the aisle, that's the work we've got to do. We have to defend our democracy. If we do not, we're going to see an increasing chasm between the will of the people and what they actually get. Let me give you one small example. You can, and this is the case now, you can gerrymander districts in such a way that when you look at a state legislature and you see how people voted and the representation that's in that legislature, it doesn't really make sense. Like, if this many people voted this way, how do you get, you understand? Because of the way they've drawn the lines, which also gets addressed in the For the People Act. So partisan and racial gerrymandering, the outsized influence of money in our politics, the fact that voting just ought to be easy. People ought to be registered. You ought to be able to register online. You must have early voting, weekend voting, drop boxes. All of that is for the people. Stand up for the people.
So JCPA has, I want to talk a little bit about criminal justice reform, and JCPA has made this a priority. We just heard about the launching of the Jewish Network on Criminal Justice Reform, and we heard about raising the faith voice to end mass incarceration. You were instrumental in launching the EMI in Atlanta. Why is criminal justice reform so important to you, and what are some of the goals that you have set for yourself as a senator on this very important issue?
I'll be really quick here, Corey, because I'm seeing your note that says we got to wrap this up. This is what happens when you ask a Baptist preacher to close out the conference. So let me wrap this up. So I'm very focused on George Floyd. We've got to address the issue of mass incarceration, which is driven in large part by the so-called war on drugs. And so let me just say what the opportunity here, one of the opportunities here is this. When in 1980, the drug was crack and the bodies, at least that we saw, were brown and black, we had a war on drugs. Now we're dealing with an opioid epidemic that is largely rural, suburban, and white. And now we have a public health emergency. Now, I've pointed out the contrast, not for us to get mad, but for us to get engaged. Let's build a multiracial, multi-faith movement that addresses the angst, the pain that so many people are feeling, that they're trying to self-medicate, and creates beloved community where all of God's children can thrive.
And thank you. And you are so right that we need to create that community, and working together and building the relationships that you talked about before will get us there, hopefully. And your leadership is going to be so important in Capitol Hill on making all of that work possible. So on behalf of JCPA, I want to thank you so much for spending the time with us today. I know you are incredibly busy, and we are grateful to hear your voice, to hear your message, and to be able to watch you work on these issues. And we know you'll be fighting for all these issues that we care about. So thank you again so very much for speaking with us today.
Thank you so very much. Great to be here with all of you.
Wow, what a way to end the conference. I certainly want to live in Reverend Warnock's beloved community, and JCPA will be working to try and accomplish that. It really has been a great conference. I think everyone has probably learned a lot. Of course, we'd all probably prefer to be in each other's company, and hopefully that can happen next year. But this has been a great conference. I want to thank Harold Goldberg and Deborah Cohn for chairing this conference and really pulling together what has been an enlightening and entertaining program. They could not have done it without our wonderful staff. Melanie Gorelick and Haya Luftig in particular have really worked hard on this conference, but they've also been assisted by Tammy Gilden, by Glenn Dubin, by Betsy Epstein, and by Elisa Delamico. We really do have a great staff, and again, I want to thank them for all that they've done to make this conference successful. There is one more portion of this conference that some of you will be participating in tonight, and that's the Delegates Assembly session. It will be on Zoom. It's not on Hop-In. You're required to have registered and should have received a link when you registered so that you can join that Zoom call. If you have not received a link, please call either Tammy Gilden or Melanie immediately after this session so they can arrange to make sure that you can be on Delegate Assembly session tonight. We'll be debating 5 resolutions: combating climate change, expanding voter access, condemning genocide of the Uyghur people, supporting the Abraham Accords, and fostering a more constructive political climate. And that will be from 7 p.m. Eastern to hopefully we'll finish by 9 p.m. Eastern or so. Finally, I want to take this opportunity to thank Michael Fromm, whose term as the chair is up May 31st. Michael, you have led us through troubled waters and really done a great job. I want to offer you a Yasher Koach for that. Of course, you don't get off easy. I'm going to be calling on you for advice and guidance as I take over as chair. And I really could go on for quite some time praising Michael and the work that he has done as chair of JCPA, but we don't have that amount of time. So let me just pay you what I consider to be about the highest compliment that can be paid to anyone. Michael, you are truly a mensch, and I have enjoyed working with you and look forward to continuing to work with you. And Mike, over to you.
Well, thank you, David. I really appreciate your kind words. And I also want to join you in thanking our incredible staff, but I really would like to talk to the person who put us on the agenda after Senator Warnock. That was just not fair. But in any case, I do appreciate your kind comments. And as you are set to take over as the next chair of JCPA, I know from working with you that you'll carry on the rich tradition of delivering the highest quality programming to our stakeholders, especially as the state of affairs around the country and the world demand that we equip them with the tools to be nimble, knowledgeable, and well prepared to engage in the community relations space. I think we would agree that yesterday and today, we not only learned a lot about the what, but perhaps more importantly, we learned a lot about what to do. And I think that's one of JCPA's greatest contributions to community relations work. In addition to our staff, David and I want to take this opportunity to thank some other people: Jeff Newelt, Sherrill King-Abramson, Bobby Abrams, Brina Chu, Paulina Carey, and Stephanie Hauser, Pamela French, Jacob Nevitt, and everyone else on the tech team and the organization team that helped support the conference implementation. David and I are grateful to these people, but we're mostly grateful to you, our committed stakeholders and partners, those who presented and those who came to enhance their social justice advocacy skills. Without you, JCPA couldn't have the impact that it does. Please consider donating to help support the important work of JCPA. We hope we've made the case for how important and crucial our work is today, as it was when we were founded. We can't do this work without your generous support, so we appreciate that if you would visit our website, jewishpublicaffairs.org, and give generously. With that, David, thank you for everything you do, and I officially adjourn the JCPA 2021 conference. Thank you, everyone, and be well.
And we'll see you at the Delegates Assembly in a little bit.